let's start today's session with a very quick introduction just to set the stage to the discussions later today. So this is the name of the conference, The Backup is Dead. We truly believe that this is the end of legacy backup solutions. They're not enough anymore in the modern world. If you look at the current trends, the data volumes are growing, and we have to address the new complexities. So we don't have enough IT staff to support everybody, especially now when everybody's working remotely. We have to address the growing trends of ransomware and cyber attacks. We have to address the issues with vulnerabilities that vendors are not capable to protect us from in the real time, just because the amount of the IT infrastructure is just growing. Now it's spread out everywhere because of the remote work. So the trends are not moving into the right direction. And the existing tools for MSPs are not enough. If we think about the current remote work, what's happening now with today's environment is that now we have lots and lots of customers, people who used to work from the secure corporate networks, working from home and unsecure environment with a bunch of different devices in the network. So we have lots of IoT devices, smart sensors, smart fridges, and smart kettles connecting to the same network where we have the work environment. So those devices are providing additional security gaps. But think about the other people in the same network. So we have other household members who use the same network from their devices, and they may not have the security trainings, they may not have the patch devices. And also we use new tools, like the example of Zoom. Now we are in a Zoom session. It's just an example of a tool that everybody's using now. And the tool is used on unsecure network in the multiple home environment. All of those environments are not as protected as a corporate IT environment. And the service providers, they used to support customers in those corporate networks, in those secure or somewhat secure networks, but now they have to support multiple different locations, and they usually focus on a particular device of a user that is used for accessing the corporate network and working with the corporate information, but they are not protecting the rest of the devices and the rest of the network. So the exposure, security exposure, is significantly higher. So the tools that we have as MSPs, they're not enough anymore. So they are not enough to protect our existing environment. The next slide, please. So the problem is that we have multiple different tools that we have to use. And at the end of the day, the infrastructure becomes complex, and using multiple tools becomes expensive. And at the end of the day, it becomes not secure just because we cannot guarantee the reliability of those tools. And the other issue is that security budgets of SMBs are very small. And now a lot of SMBs, they're facing other issues than security. So they are trying to cut costs, and sometimes at the expense of what is important now, the IT security. So there's a gap between the budget and between what needs to be delivered. And there is a gap for MSPs. So the next slide, please. And now the MSPs are facing this issue with multiple tools for solving different problems. And because of the multiple tools, there's not enough reliability, not enough flexibility, and there's delays with deployment and the issues with maintaining this overall infrastructure. And even the simple thing is managing multiple licenses, multiple vendors can be problematic. So what we propose, the approach that we suggest, and next slide, please. What we suggest is the integrated approach. The solution we presented today, Acronis Cyber Protection, Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud, is integration between the data security and cybersecurity in one single package with all the tools that are necessary to protect a specific device combined into one single solution. So this is just to set the stage for the upcoming discussion. And now, with that, we'll move forward to the panel. So the panel today is We're Under Attack. And let me quickly go through the agenda for today. Just to remind everybody who just connected a few seconds ago that we have a panel. After the panel, we'll have a live demonstration of Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud. And after that, we'll have another panel. And then we will wrap up. We'll make sure that we answer all the questions in Q&A, and we'll select the best questions and award gifts to the best questions. So with that, I would like to introduce our moderator, Richard Tabb. Richard owned his own MSP business for more than 8 years before he became an advisor to MSPs on different issues like business growth, pricing, marketing, operational efficiency. He's also leading a very popular Tabb blog and a very popular podcast, Tabb Talk, and they both are great resources for IT consultants and MSPs. So Richard, I will ask you to introduce the panel.
Thanks, Gaidar. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We have a great bunch of panelists with us today for today's discussion. Let me introduce them in turn. So first, we have Christelle Heikkila, who is the IT Director of Arsenal Football Club. Now, Christelle is responsible for technology across a very diverse business environment, from football analysis of on-pitch games to retail operations. Before Arsenal, Christelle was head of IT applications at health and beauty retailer Superdrug and at Sainsbury's, the UK's #3 supermarket chain, including later years in their newly created digital lab. Christelle started her career as a pharmacist, but moved to Accenture to become a management consultant, putting her on the eventual path to IT director. Christelle, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Next, we are fortunate to have Stepán, Bínek, Product Manager of Cloud Services for Zebra Systems, a leading provider of cybersecurity and data protection solutions in the Czech Republic. Stepán started at Zebra as a support engineer for Acronis products, later moving into sales for both end users and resellers. For the last 2 years, he has managed the Acronis cloud business, working to develop a strong managed service provider base focusing on the Acronis cyber cloud platform. Stepán, we really appreciate you joining us today.
Hello, Richard. Thanks for introduction. Do we hear each other well?
Can indeed, yes.
Great.
Right, finally, last but by no means least, also joining us today is Bertil, Acronis's VP of Cloud for the European region. After a career in banking, Bertil shifted to the IT world in 2001. He's built a wealth of cloud and telco experience over the past 2 decades, leading to his current role, his current focus, I should say, on building Acronis's cloud-based cyber protection offerings through its telecom and cable operator partners. Bertil, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you all the participants. We're hitting almost 650 partners online, so proud to be here.
Looking very good. Let's jump in, if we can then, panel, with question 1. How should MSPs and businesses be modifying their data protection and cybersecurity regimens in response to the current pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic? And Christelle, maybe if I could turn to you first of all, what are Arsenal Football Club doing in response to this?
Well, yes, sadly, we are seeing hackers trying to exploit the current global crisis. So at the moment, of course, technical controls are as important as ever. However, we're particularly seeing an increase in things like smishing and phishing messages, and that's where user awareness becomes very important as well. I think the challenge we're all facing right now is a lot of people are worried about some very serious things. People are worried about their job and about their health. And so I think we need to be very careful when we give advice around how to keep safe from a cybersecurity perspective, that we adopt the right tone in all of our communications right now.
That makes absolute sense. Stepán, if I can turn to you next, how is this affecting what you're doing?
Richard, that is a very good question. The vast majority of people are now working from home, and this is something new for many businesses and MSP providers. Often there are no data protection and cybersecurity processes set up, and right now they are forced to deal with this challenge due to the pandemic. The first often neglected aspect. Do we hear each other well?
We do indeed, yeah.
Okay, that's great. The first often neglected aspect is secure access to corporate file servers. Here it is necessary to look for solutions that combine data security, but at the same time allows employees to easily access companies' data. work with them and share them. Luckily, MSPs and their customers can leverage products like Acronis Cyber Files Cloud and use secure access to their files together with ease and simplicity. The second aspect is lack of protection of mobile devices like laptops and tablets and their remote management. It's ideal to look for solutions that combine both data protection while not forgetting on cybersecurity.
Bertil, if I can turn to you, what are your thoughts on the current situation?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a great question. And referring back to my previous role as a private banker, actually, nothing is to be trusted unless it is checked and controlled. So we as MSPs and we as Acronis, we need to make sure that we help everybody in this changing situation to check the changes, make sure they are safe and secure, but still on an operational level, you need to be able to function and work. So change comes with noise, and noise needs to be managed, otherwise it's getting into chaos. So we try from a Acronis perspective to create solutions, and we share knowledge to support everybody in need. And that doesn't stop with the product portfolio. It also we try to help wherever we can within the communities.
Good, good. Now, obviously, COVID-19 is something that is on everybody's minds at the moment, but cybersecurity threats were around well before COVID-19. So what I want to do is to move on to our next question and talk about the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by the ongoing flood of increasingly sophisticated ransomware attacks on businesses. Christelle, if I can turn to you first of all. Arsenal, high profile, you must be a target for cyber criminals. How are you handling this?
Of course, ransomware is a threat, and I think ransomware is an economic threat, but also it can have more serious consequences. We only have to have a look at the news right now and all the hospital images that we see and the use of technology that they have. So there could be really quite serious consequences of ransomware. I mean, with any cyber threat, it's about reducing risk, and it's about taking a multifaceted approach. I think the one thing I would say about ransomware in particular is I think this is something that businesses should talk about and discuss what their approach would be in the event that they were faced with a ransomware attack, and really think carefully about what their approach would be in advance of that situation. So I think that would be the key thing for me.
That makes sense, yeah. Stepán, if I can turn to you, what are the opportunities as well as the challenges presented by ransomware?
Yes, I cannot speak here for the whole Europe, but in the region of Central Europe where we operate, we are seeing more and more often ransomware attacks, not only on individuals like consumers, but also on hospitals, cities, and companies. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a security breach in one of the biggest hospitals in the Czech Republic, where ransomware defray was most likely used. Problem is that bad guys are using sophisticated ransomware attacks like defray mentioned before, or Snake, Econs, WannaCry, you choose, and other. It's no secret that you can pay for ransomware as a service on Darknet. On the other part, it's a great opportunity for MSPs to look for a solution that address not only reactive protection like backup, but also the proactive one. Fortunately, almost all Acronis products have active ransomware protection that has already saved many customers from being encrypted. It's important to use those solutions not only on servers, but especially on endpoints, where the infection often penetrates the network first.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Bertil, with your background in banking, you must be unfortunately very familiar with the challenges of ransomware.
Yes, unfortunately we are. And at first the ransomware attacks were focused on stealing data for the knowledge of the data. Nowadays, the data gets stolen as a business model. The business model is getting more and more automated. And let's take an example. A picture of my kids is of high value to me when they were 3-4 years old, but for a criminal, it doesn't mean anything. So they're just after the money. And with the coronavirus crisis, I wouldn't like to see a hospital going down due to a ransomware attack. So this is life-threatening. And we, as a company, we really urge everybody who's in this area to start using zero-day security protection, because the old means of protecting by implementing databases where exploits have been worked on, it's just too late. You need to have zero-day protection nowadays, and otherwise you're vulnerable.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'm going to move the question along to something that comes up again and again during my conversation with not only managed service providers worldwide, but anybody who employs IT professionals. And it's about the growing shortage of cybersecurity talent. Christelle, if I can turn to you, what are the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by that shortage of cybersecurity talent?
That's a great question and a very real problem. From my perspective, I think the challenge is security is actually a very wide topic. People think about it all being technical, but there's everything from policy, training, obviously technical controls. And clearly it's very difficult, therefore, to get individuals that are multi-skilled like that. And I should imagine that it becomes even more of a challenge the smaller the organisation, those organisations that just don't have budgets to employ a whole team of cybersecurity specialists. My personal approach is what I say to my team and my IT department is everybody has a role to play in cybersecurity. So it's not just the responsibility of one or two people, everyone is responsible. So that means weaving cyber security, business as usual activities, if you like, into their overall role. And that can be anything from people on the service desk who basically are responsible for doing inductions to new joiners and making sure they're cyber aware, to say software engineers and making sure that they are putting security first when they're developing their systems. So I guess that's the way I look at it, that everybody has a role to play.
I love that approach because it is a team effort, isn't it? And the weakest link in the chain is that the person is the most unprepared. Brilliant. Stepán, if I can turn to you, obviously you're at the cutting edge of this with your team. So you're seeing the challenges that are presented by the cybersecurity shortage, but surely there's also opportunities for managed service providers here.
Yeah, Richard, to be honest, this is not entirely area of my expertise, but if you think of it, it would be nice and useful to have more focus on cybersecurity, both on universities and high school, or even dedicated study programs. I can quite well imagine private and public sectors cooperating in this area. Yeah, that's my point, my few words on this. Sorry for short.
No, you make a really good point, actually, because this is not something that's going to be changed overnight. This is something that MSPs, employers have got to work with local colleges, universities, because we need new talent coming through. Bertil, if I can turn to you at this stage, so again, you're somebody who's at the coalface of this. You're seeing the impact on managed service providers, but it's also an opportunity for them, isn't it?
Absolutely. So first of all, going through the threat here. When I worked as a hoster myself, we faced the same challenge when hosting was picking up rapidly in the early 2000s. And we saw an increase of salaries, we saw job hoppers, and we saw a lack of knowledge to the people you hired. So what we did actually, with a couple of colleagues, we actually started an educational program together, and we shared the resources. And instead of having people hopping around, what we did is actually we lent them to each other to get a new experience at another company. And that way we prevented job hopping, increasing business continuity, and keeping the salaries at a reasonable level. Second to the question is, at Acronis, we've grown our company over the last year with more than 500 people. So if you look at our HR team, they are experts in hiring the right people. It is getting harder and harder. The only advantage we as Acronis have, we have multiple hot spots around the globe where we can employ the people. So we can employ them at the place they like to be. So from an MSP perspective, it's a huge challenge to keep your cost under control and keep your service level agreement with your partners within the limits. So that is a challenge, and what I fear for the MSP market is that we will face more than 100,000 jobs in Europe just on cybersecurity in the next 5 to 10 years being created. That's really a lot of jobs to be created, and that will come with the economics of a scarce number of people having the qualifications, meaning prices will go up. Sorry, but that's the fact of life. What I do see with our connections with universities is actually that more and more universities start to teach young people in this direction. So a wave of new generation experts will come, but they're not there yet. So my advice to any MSP would be connect with the regional universities or even bachelor teaching environments, and be ahead of the curve, be early in hiring. So focus on the 18, 19, 20-year-olds and not wait until they're graduated.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and something Stepán touched on as well. As a former MSP myself, I'm just going to say, I think this is an opportunity for MSPs. Employers are struggling to recruit the right people, and an MSP, of course, can offer a multitude of disciplines. So for the MSPs watching our webcast today, I would encourage them to be positioning that as a solution to employers' problems. Let's keep the conversation going along then. As something that's very topical for me, just as I was about to come into this webinar, Windows prompted me to do some updates. Now, I'm an IT professional, and I know I'm not alone in this, whereas updates are a daily basis thing. So my question is, how can we help manage all of those people out there who are struggling on an ongoing basis to keep up with their vulnerability and patching issues? Christelle, I'll turn to you first. Arsenal have got a huge IT infrastructure, lots of updates every day. How do you manage it all?
Well, I like your turn of phrase there. It's the struggle of businesses to keep up with vulnerability and patching. Clearly, patching is incredibly important. And as we were talking earlier, never is it more important than right now. What I can tell you is, you talked a little bit about my background. I used to work in the retail industry. And it's very easy, if you're a retailer, to predict when the busy times of the business are. Obviously, it's going to be times like Easter, Christmas, increasingly Valentine's Day in the UK. And you know that is not a good time to start applying patches and rebooting servers. I have to say, at Arsenal, it's even more complicated. Because yes, we are a football club, and again, you point to the fact we are a diverse business. People just see what we do on the pitch, and maybe they see our stadium, but there's lots of other things that go on at Arsenal people don't necessarily think about. We are an e-commerce retailer, a bricks and mortar retailer. We have effectively like a charity business, if you like. Ticketing is a business, and they all have different demands at different times. We also have the further challenge of fixtures move around all the time as well. So I guess that the key thing for me is, how do you manage that complexity? And for me, it's about having a very open and direct communication channel with those business systems owners in particular. So they understand why you're patching, the importance of it, but they are proactively helping you find windows of opportunity and make sure that they're involved in testing pre the application of patches as well as post. So I guess key for me is that communication.
Christelle, that's wonderful advice, because I know there's going to be lots of MSPs watching this who would love to be patching their client systems up to date, but clients are saying, no, I'm too busy at the moment, don't do it. And that leads to security challenges. Stepán, if I can turn to you at this point, cloud systems, so many endpoints, so many devices and systems that need patching. What advice would you give for our audience?
Yeah, Richard, the answer is simple and yet difficult. And I absolutely agree with Christelle. From my point, it's desirable to find solutions that is capable automate and monitor entire infrastructure within set intervals. It is likely that today's IT administrators are not able to oversee ever-growing number of solutions up to date with all security fixes. I'm really glad that Acronis has come up with a solution like Cyberprotect, which Gaidar spoke about, that has possibility to detect new devices in the network and apply a protection plan to them that has all the elements of the cybersecurity available, from backup to disaster recovery to vulnerability assessment and also patch management.
Got it. And Bertil, if I can turn to you again, if I pick on you with your background in finance. Now, something Christelle said there about, you know, working with people to make sure that this is done at convenient times. The banking industry, you must be really familiar with this because people expect banking 24/7 now. How are you moving that knowledge onto the work that you're doing at Acronis?
Well, if you look at my background, we have the phrase of safety, accessibility, privacy, authenticity, and security. That's the basis of our strategy to move forward. One single pane of glass to solve a lot of the problems Christelle already mentioned. But you need to manage so many different businesses within your business, and you have so many different applications to manage. So IT departments need to continuously educate themselves, and within the banking industry, that was no different. In 40, 50 years ago, a bank worked from 9 to 5 and that was it. It's now a 7/24 business, like the football business, like an MSP business. So downtime for updates and patches, sorry, but you can't do that anymore. So service level agreements also dribble into small and mid-sized businesses. If you want to provide a service as an MSP to, let's say, a 20 or 40 man company, they already start asking you for a service level agreement, which was not done 10, 15 years ago. That was only done at the banks, at the larger corporations. So education, working with legal on how do you deal with service level agreements and integrate that into your IT security strategy, that's a sophisticated job. And that's where the most or the biggest opportunity lays for the MSPs listening today. Here you can show your expertise, bring your knowledge, and make sure that you get a, let's say, Bank of England grade of security level to a consumable level for an MSP or a small business. And that's why you also see telecom operators nowadays advertising themselves as the most secure broadband provider, because they understand that their pipe, where we all make use of today, is the gateway also for the criminals. So the whole ecosystem is involved in keeping the bad guys out. And last thing regarding the paraphrase to the banks had a big vault and it was a steel door and you couldn't crack it easily. Nowadays, the steel door doesn't work anymore because your value is in your data. It's not in the safe anymore. Your value is on your hard drive. It's your intellectual property rights you need to protect. And that's a different animal. So from that perspective, if you look at the classical banks versus what an ISP does now, an ISP or a cloud storage provider is a bank nowadays. And then they need to have first grade protection. And that doesn't mean an armored guard on duty. That means a cybersecurity expert behind the keyboard.
Yeah, this is great advice. We're getting good feedback on the chat. Thank you everybody for joining us. We've got hundreds joining us. If you're an MSP and do want to know more about how you can sort of systemize your cybersecurity approach, there's a panel session coming on later on. I'd encourage you to stay tuned for that. Now, we promised you some practical tips and advice. Each of our panelists have provided one practical tip for you as attendees. some single practices that MSPs and business can employ to address the threats that we've touched upon so far. So Christelle, if I can turn to you first of all, you've mentioned establishing and promote a cyber-aware culture across the business. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
So yes, I guess it ties back a little bit to what I was saying before. Certainly with my IT team, it's about giving everybody responsibility for cybersecurity, but it's broader than that. It's trying to promote a cyber-aware culture across, in my case, the whole of Arsenal Football Club, but any business that you're in. And obviously, a culture is all about how people behave, whether that's doing things to keep them safe or, you know, having like one of my fellow panelists is going to talk about having checklists, whatever it is that you're doing, but making that part of the organization's culture. And all I would say is I think sometimes you need to be a little bit creative as to how you bring that culture to life, because what we can't do is just preach about cybersecurity all the time. Sometimes we have to maybe weave a bit of fun or just be creative about how you bring that culture to life is my advice.
That's great advice. I love it. Stepán, if I can turn to you, you've said, consider the challenges of managing multiple cybersecurity and data protection solutions. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, absolutely, Richard. Yeah, I would say that we are in times where time is most valued commodity and time is also money in some aspects. So consider how much would you pay for complete cybersecurity, which should include backup, DR, malware protection, and all those things we have spoke about today. Usually, every solution has its own management, and it's time consuming and costly to educate your IT department with every one of them. So my advice would be go look for a solution that would cover all or almost all of these aspects. It will save your time and also money.
Makes sense. Bertil, if I can turn to you finally, you said make a tailored vulnerability checklist and review it regularly. I think that's self-explanatory, but if there's anything you'd like to add.
It is self-explanatory, and it might even be an open door to the majority of the audience. Yet, in my practice, I actually don't come across a lot of companies or CTOs who take this seriously. So whenever I have a conversation with a CTO on his vulnerability checklist, and when he last used it, and when they last did a rollback, they turn red in their faces. I have no idea why, but they know they need to do it. They accept the fact that they need to maintain that list. Yet again, due to daily pressure, they don't get to it. So one of my second tips would be maybe you can do a bit of gamification with your IT team to say, hey, how can we make a game out of this security checklist and vulnerability checking to make sure that you continuously update the checklist, because it's not a static thing. You need to do, like we did in accounting, plan, do, check, act. It's a cycle, and you need to be strict on yourself. Like you brush your teeth in the morning and in the evening, it's also it goes the same with the vulnerability checklist. You need to maintain it, execute it, and adjust.
I love that advice, and especially about gamification. That can really work. As a former MSP owner, we used to do that within our business to keep checklist up to date. Great advice. So audience, please continue to submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A interface, not the chat. The chat is a bit like the Matrix. It's a stream of consciousness there, so use the Q&A. We'll answer a few on air now, panel, if we can. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to ask you to keep your answers to this quite short. Christelle, if I can turn to you first. One of the questions we've had come through is, how do you rate the importance of managing known vulnerabilities versus zero-day vulnerabilities?
That's a great question. I mean, in both cases, it's very important. We do everything we can, don't we, to try and deal with known vulnerabilities in particular, but it's the zero vulnerabilities that can sometimes catch people out. I think what is important here is not to become complacent. So people go, oh, we're fine, we've got antivirus software, it'll deal with it. I think people shouldn't be complacent, and I guess building on a point I made earlier, it's about planning for the fact you may well fall victim to some malware, for example, that's not been detected before. How are you going to respond? So that would be my view.
Good. Stepán, I'm going to turn to you for this question next that we've been asked. We've watched downtime costs trending steadily upward and now worry that customers that suffer an outage may not survive if the economic downturn doesn't kill them first. What should our priorities be to help them?
Well, Richard, I would say that the vast majority of companies, especially in the SMB sector, cannot offer enterprise-grade disaster recovery-like solution based on hardware redundancy of every aspect of their infrastructure. So my advice would be go for affordable pay-per-use cloud solution like Acronis disaster recovery cloud, which will allow you the same possibilities and safety as costly on-prem infrastructure. Also, if you will be calculating your downtime cost, do not forget on cost of work of every employee who needs critical IT services for their jobs. It's common mistake that only cost of new hardware is included in such calculations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Bertil, I've saved a good question for you here. I hope you're up for it
already.
So the question we've been asked is, I'm concerned about the spate of supply chain attacks on MSPs. We saw a lot of them in the last year, didn't we? Breached RMMs used to deliver malware to subscribers. How should we respond? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I can talk a couple of hours about this, but we need to prevent, well, actually the COVID analogy goes up here. We need to prevent at the MSP level any malware, malicious activities, because it's going to spread as a flood over your customer ecosystem. So from all the customers who are on the webinar, you need to ask your MSP or your service provider or your telecom operator what measurements are they taking to help you prevent, because there is not one single solution which will make your cyber secure. It is the value chain, like Christelle already said. It's all the links together, which create a very strong value chain. And the weakest link is going to be the one they're going to go after. And we as Acronis definitely don't want to be the weakest link. We put a lot of money and effort in creating solutions to prevent that. But we need everybody in the value chain to support this vision of working together. Cyber protection is a key message for everybody, and that's the only way we can prevent a flood of malicious software being spread around the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that answer your question?
I believe so. Yes, we'll certainly get feedback one way or another on that, Bertil. You make some very good points there. We've had dozens of questions from the audience. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for questions at the moment. So over to you for the wrap-up, Gaidam.
Thank you, Richard, Christelle, Stepán, Bertil. Thank you for the wonderful session. Here are some resources for our attendees that you can use. There are some white papers and research, and also you can get access to the free trial of Acronis Cyber Cloud, as well as you can schedule a one-on-one demo if you need that. And just to summarize the session, so what we heard here is customers of MSPs are facing challenges in this new reality of increased remote work. We have more vulnerabilities, more exposure, more IT infrastructure that you have to support remotely, and the cyber threats are just growing and growing and growing. At the same time, SMBs, they just don't have enough money, don't have enough budget to address cybersecurity issues, and they don't have staff that can support them. So it all comes down to MSPs helping the SMB. That's why we at Acronis released the product, Acronis Cyber Protect, that we're rolling out as we speak to help MSPs to support their customers in this new reality. So we'll invite you to explore the new opportunity, try the trial and schedule demos and deploy it to your customers.